Welcome back to another episode of Marketing Girly by Sky Society. Today I am chatting with Margaret Lee. She is the Senior Brand Manager at Procter & Gamble. Welcome, Margaret.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for coming on. I'm very excited to jump into your career journey, and Margaret and I are going to focus a lot today on job search tips for our younger marketing girlies. So we have a lot to get through today. Super excited to chat. If you want to start, Margaret, by telling me a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Yeah, absolutely. So I am originally from Long Island, New York. So shout out to any East Coast girlies. I got my undergrad from Indiana University, studying marketing and international business. And after graduating, I joined Walmart full-time in their corporate marketing department. So I was down in Bentonville, Arkansas for about 5 years and learned a ton. Ultimately decided to pivot my career into brand management, and that's when I decided to go back to school to get my MBA, also at Indiana University, and that's kind of what kicked off my journey with Procter & Gamble. So was lucky enough to intern there and then joined full-time in June of 2020. And so I've been there for almost 5 years now, which is crazy. Started working in oral care, which was a lot of fun, learning all about electric toothbrushes and teeth whitening and toothpaste. And then most recently moved into a new role in January, working on upstream innovation across lots of different categories.
Incredible. I'm definitely excited to chat through that journey and also that decision to get your MBA, because I know that's something that a lot of people potentially have in the back of their brain but aren't exactly sure if that's the right choice for them. But I want to start because your title now is so interesting, upstream innovation. Can you tell us what that means?
Yeah. So I'm only 3 months in, so I'm going to do my best. So upstream innovation obviously looks like a lot of different things, but the specific team that I work on works on fiber technologies. So an example of things that have already launched in the market would be like Olay Cleansing Melt or Tide Evo. So basically imagine you take a product like face wash, you pump air into it, it dries and it becomes lots of different fibers, and you have basically, it looks like a little cotton pad essentially where you add water and then it becomes face wash. So I'm working on different products that use that kind of technology. It's been in development by the company for I think over a decade now, but it's a lot of fun. I'm kind of working on a team that is a test and learn lab where I'm working on these new the fiber technology across these different categories. So I just launched a shave cream as an example, and the ultimate goal is to be able to learn about the consumer that it's meant for. So I'm doing a lot of testing on who is our target consumer. I'm doing a lot of testing creatively to think through what's the right communication, what reasons to believe and benefits and claims are really going to resonate with that target consumer, price, and all the marketing things you can think of to eventually set it live into a broader market. Because right now we just sell direct to consumer. So the goal is to sell a little and learn a lot, and hopefully, a brand like Gillette or one of the other P&G brands could pick it up and then take it more nationally.
So is it kind of like you're at a startup within a big corporate company?
Yeah, definitely. It has that feel, which is really cool. Very different than what I was used to coming out of oral care, more traditional brand management. So yeah, it's fun to be able to start on a smaller team and be very, hands-on and very scrappy.
Yeah, that sounds like a lot of fun, and getting to test new products and like I said, being on like a startup team with the resources of a big corporate company. I know a lot of women and just people in marketing, I think, are really excited by brand marketing. I think it sounds like a fun place to be, especially now with brands just truly meaning so much to the consumer. I think that a lot of people, obviously Procter & Gamble is a very special brand that kind of has built a lot of trust over many, many years. But what does it look like on the brand side? I know kind of in your past, you've worked on product and you've worked in like different areas within marketing, but can you kind of talk and speak to what makes brand marketing unique within the marketing realm?
Yeah. So brand marketing or brand management, why I chose to go into that field was you're kind of like the CEO of your own business. And so it tends to be more of a general management function, which I think is really appealing. You get to have control, which is great, but you get to learn a lot about all the various aspects of the business. So everything from marketing, like advertising and such, to merchandising, to supply chain, to finance, like the P&L of everything. So it's really cool to have visibility to everything and to be able to lead a team of cross-functional partners to kind of help continue to grow the business.
I love that analogy, being the CEO of your own company. That is so cool. I've never heard anyone say that before. I love that. And then what are some of the things that for you, obviously, like, again, I'm trying to just even imagine because Procter & Gamble's such a big company and you're working on brand, like, is it that so being the brand manager, we'll kind of go back one position. So kind of when you were the brand manager of like Crest and Oral-B, obviously those are established brands that people already know and love. So what is your goal as the brand manager? Is it to maintain that love for the brand? Is it to grow it, or kind of what is your primary responsibility there?
Yeah, definitely to grow it for sure. P&G leadership tends to set very lofty goals for all of the businesses. So yeah, when I was in oral care working on Crest and Oral-B, we would have financial targets each year. So from a sales standpoint, we're trying to grow the business, drive more sales, more profit, top and bottom line. But at the end of the day, especially working in oral care, I think being able to tie back to like just the number of consumers that you're impacting is always key, especially for oral care, like actually benefiting your oral health care. Like that's a health benefit, not just, ooh, my hair is pretty, like not to poo-poo on the, Pantene or hair care brands, but I think oral care serves a really unique benefit for consumers, where it is like very health related and like whole body health and all of that. But again, yes, like the goal is to drive sales, to grow the business. We work very closely with our customer teams. So teams that sit with our retailers like Walmart and Target, because they see the day-to-day business at those particular customers. And so we want to make sure that we're driving strategies that are creating growth for our customers as well. And so we can kind of all grow together.
Interesting. Okay. And you mentioned, so one of the things that you and I kind of had also talked about is something that you're passionate about is mentoring and coaching other people, which I think is so incredible. And obviously a huge mission that we have here at Marketing Girly is helping empower the next generation of marketing leaders. So can you tell me a little bit about why you are excited about supporting recruiting or diversity recruiting, and kind of why that's something that you're passionate about?
Yeah. So before I decided to start my marketing career, I was actually interested in becoming a teacher. Like I love the idea of like teaching people. I'm sure part of it is like, I know more than you. I can teach you things and educate you and tell you how you should think or how to think. But I always liked the idea of giving back, and yeah, so I guess around teaching, that was something that I was always interested in. But I think especially now that I am a marketing professional, I've been working in marketing for 10 years, I've learned a lot of things like through my career, going through, my MBA and then jumping into brand at P&G. I have a lot of passion for coaching and mentoring and recruiting because I think, it's hard to get into certain companies. It's a tough job market out there right now. So anything that I can do to like help ease the process for other people, I think is great. I mean, what a privilege it is to be able to help someone, like to have the knowledge, to have the expertise, to be able to share that with someone, I think is really, really special.
That is incredible. And I know I hear it a lot, and we are in a very tumultuous time right now. I feel like ever since the pandemic, it's just been years of uncertainty and uncertain times, and we're kind of in another period of that. And I know the job search for a lot of women, and I hear it a lot in our community, is that it is competitive, it is difficult, and that especially with marketing, those jobs are highly, highly competitive. So do you have any advice when it comes to standing out when maybe you don't have as much experience as you would like to, but you have these companies and these roles that you really, really would love to get?
Yeah. I think there's like 3 key areas I definitely focus on. First would be having a good resume. Second would be really upping your interview skills. And then third, if not maybe the most important one, would be networking. Unfortunately, sometimes when it comes to finding a job, like the online job application ends up being a dark hole. Just a black hole. Like you can send an application to like hundreds and hundreds of places and you might not end up doing anything. But if you know someone at a company, if you have an in with someone, or at least talk to someone to learn a little bit more deeply about a role you're interested in or just about the industry, like that's always super helpful. So I always tell people that I work with, like go network, talk to as many people as you want to like get the knowledge that you want to get, and just be really smart about how you network as well. But beyond networking, for like resumes, like obviously when you have a little less experience, it can be challenging. I know some places will, for like entry level jobs, will require like, hey, like we need you to have like however many years and you're fresh out of undergrad, but like you didn't have that many years. So like how could you get the entry level? So I think when you do have less experience, like make the most of what you do have. I'm sure people are familiar with, leveraging verbs that are really strong, like just really include relevant language in your resume, making sure that you really talk about your accomplishments versus talking about tasks or language that might be more job description oriented. Because at the end of the day, when a hiring manager looks at your resume, like they want to understand what you uniquely accomplished. So make sure you talk about your accomplishments. Make sure you have numbers, like quantify your results. If you worked on a team, how many team members were there? If you helped grow something, what percent did you grow it by? Like anything to quantify, like that is always super, super key. And then for interviews, again, like you got to talk about your accomplishments and claim ownership of your accomplishments. I run into a lot of people who say, we accomplished X as a team, which again is great. Like it's fun to be on a team, but at the end of the day, like what did you individually do? So like saying I did X is really a simple thing that you can do by just claiming your effort. But again, following the CAR or STAR format is super simple. How I've prepared for interviews in the past when I was recruiting for internships and such, just practicing a ton, pulling questions off the internet. I like to rehearse personally, so I would just have a whole list of questions. I knew like what story I would respond with, and then I would just say it out loud and repeat it as much as possible so I was comfortable with my story. So everyone prepares in very different ways, but at the end of the day, like the interview, you're trying to sell yourself, so anything you say should convince the person that you are the right fit for the role. But yeah, so those would be the 3 key areas.
I love those. Okay, I have a lot of questions now that you mentioned all those incredible points. Okay, I want to start with the resume. Actually, at Sky Society, we're currently in the interview process for some fun roles, and I want us to start because I want to add one thing here because this happened too many times where the resume, one, was not formatted correctly, like whatever you downloaded it as did not look great in my system. And then the second is that either because of that or not because of that, the resume, sometimes people's resumes were like 3 pages or more. And this is a role that requires 3+ years of experience. There's no reason why your resume should be that long. So that was something that would like really immediately kind of put me off from an applicant. And then the other thing that would really put me off from an applicant is not seeing the ownership of what you did, right? Like I would see a lot of bullet points, but I would be a little bit confused about really exactly what you did and the outcome that you had, like you mentioned that too, like seeing those metrics. So for me personally, those are like 2 things that were really easy to like filter candidates out if I couldn't understand what they individually did, their results, and again, if I felt like their resume was just way too long and not organized in a way that I thought it should be, because again, like I'm hiring you to do this position, I want to know that you're organized and your organization of your resume reflects that. So I'm curious for you, Margaret, are there any mistakes that you see made that you just feel like are kind of maybe not maybe immediate no's for you, or just things that you think are easy for someone to fix because they might be turning off the hiring manager from hiring them just because they're making these mistakes on their resumes?
Yeah. So funny you point out like the resume downloading weird. So make it into a PDF. Like that's such
Yes,
a
so
simple
simple.
thing.
So
Just
simple.
yeah, do it in Word and then just print and save as a PDF. Like
And check, like, open the PDF. You did it in Word. You download
yes.
it. Check it because sometimes it will mess up with the formatting, or even Canva does that
Hmm.
too, where like it looks good on the Google Doc or the Word or wherever you built it, but you
Yeah.
download a PDF and so just like yeah, check it out.
Double check, do the due diligence. No, for sure. I think the things that I've seen from like prospective intern candidates, so sometimes you look at the bullet points and it's very like a lot of it can be job description kind of language, kind of like what I was saying before. So very generic language. It's like, okay, well, anyone can do this, right? Because this is a job description. Hypothetically, anyone could be hired for this job. So for the bullet points, again, it really needs to be very specifically detailing like what you actually accomplished, because you individually can accomplish that. Like if anyone else were in this position, they should not be able to achieve that same thing. So not having job description or like describing tasks, I think is really important. So again, like really focusing on the accomplishment itself. So like yeah, what you actually, the results that you achieved, whether it was sales related or you saved money or you helped manage a team or whatever that looks like, including accomplishments is important. Making sure to include dates is also important, especially if you are earlier in your career. I think showing if you had multiple roles, like showing progression and how quickly you were able to progress, I think could work to your benefit. Education, obviously, that's a no-brainer. And then I always like to include like a little additional section. It's more of a, I guess, personal kind of piece, whether it's volunteering you do on the side or just a personal interest. Like I personally really enjoy cooking, so I include a little line about cooking in my personal resume. So just a little flavor of like what your actual personality is outside of your professional experience.
I love that. Excuse me, I think it's so great to kind of have those little things that make you stand out, right? Because they're going to see a lot of resumes, and even put something small like that, it shows your personality and that you're being authentic in
Right.
your resume. So I really love that. I actually am curious. So another question I've been getting asked a lot recently is, should you hide your graduation year on your resume? I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I think you can argue it a few different ways. I mean, if you're earlier in your career, I think you should be okay. I feel well, I really don't know. Because if you were a more recent graduate, it could show that you were younger, you're less experienced, and same works the other way. Like I'm probably gonna start hiding my graduation year soon as I get into my mid-30s. So I think it just depends, and it might depend on the company that you're going into. Like if it's got more of a startup and younger culture, maybe having a more recent graduation year is fine. So I think you could just try to gauge depending on the role you're applying for.
Yeah, I know. It's been something I think I've seen, and I see both sides of it. And the advice I say is like, if you're going to hide it, you need to have a reason to do it. Don't just do it because you saw like a TikTok video that's like,
Yes.
hide your resume, hide your graduation year. But I know there's cases like I'm not applying to jobs, but for myself, for example, like I got my job, my full-time job while I was still in college. I exaggerated a little bit about when I would graduate, and I was able to like do a full-time job while also being in school. So like by the time I graduated, I had like a really decent amount of full-time work experience. And so I feel like if I had gone to pursue a corporate career, that might have been a good reason for me to take it off, because my work experience started before I graduated. And then the other example I say, sometimes I have girls that are applying to entry-level roles because they are switching industries into marketing, but they graduated a while ago and they don't want to seem like overqualified for a role sometimes, so then they'll take it off so that way they're more considered maybe for entry-level roles. I mean, I'm sure there's different situations, but I feel like you have to have like a decent reason for doing it, because
Right.
I think especially early on in your career, I don't think it hurts you as much as you think it does, and I think sometimes social media might make it feel like it's a really big deal,
Yeah, agree.
but it also
I
might
mean,
not be.
whatever you do, just be intentional. Like do it for a reason, like you
Yeah.
said.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so we got over the key things with resumes, which I love. Yeah, showing your results, talking about numbers. Now, do you have a skills section on your resume? Do you recommend those?
I personally do not, and the reason why is because of space. So I think right now, so I'm basically 10 years into my career. I'm probably about to start page 2 of my resume, which feels really strange because I've always been taught keep it to one page. But
But
I've
once
chosen,
you hit the 10, the rules,
yeah,
like, once you hit 10 years, then you can make it into 2 page. So you're
yeah,
following the
maybe.
rules.
Yeah, definitely don't do 2 pages if you're at like 5 years. And yeah, unless you
No.
just did so much and you gotta squeeze it all in. Yeah, I did not include a skills page primarily because of space. However, I do my best to like try and sprinkle keywords into my resume, into the bullet points to kind of signal like, here's all the different types of work that I've done. So companies and recruiters would know like, oh, Margaret's familiar with XYZ. She is clearly demonstrating it through the language she's using in her bullet points that she knows what she's talking about and has had certain experiences. You should be very thoughtful and intentional about the language and the words and the phrases that you use in your resume. Like every word needs to do a lot of heavy lifting. It's such small space to communicate so many things. So just make sure you're very thoughtful about what you're putting on the page because that sometimes, unfortunately, we get seconds or we might get filtered out by AI.
Okay, interesting to hear kind of what you're doing on your resume. And I also like the fact that you're not using a resume section that might be a good fit for other people. And a lot of one of the things I always say for resumes is you don't always need every section depending on you and your career. And I always just speak to the TikTok advice because I think the TikTok advice is always really conflicting, but every single person needs something different on their resume. So there's not one correct structure. There's not one correct list of things, like of sections you have to have. It's completely going to depend. And I think as you're later in your career, like Margaret is, you really want to focus on experience. Honestly, ideally you have so much experience like Margaret that you don't need to have those other sections. Typically I have our students in our accelerator, I'll have them add like a summary or objective if they don't have enough experience to fill up their resume and they're trying to kind of add more, and we'll beef up their skill section, we'll add an objective, we'll add those things. But again, the whole goal with your resume is hopefully that it is primarily experience, because that's honestly at the end of the day what employers really care about and what matters most.
Definitely.
All right, let's move on to interviewing. So hopefully you've avoided some of the common mistakes we mentioned. You have a really strong resume and you get an interview, which is always really, really exciting. I know you mentioned some ways to prepare, but are there any maybe common mistakes you see on resume or in interviews, or any specific questions you think that people should prepare for? Just kind of any advice you have there on succeeding in interviews.
Yeah, definitely. Interviews can be tricky depending on the job you're interviewing for. Generally speaking, you'll end up answering behavioral questions. So tell me about a time when this happened. And the things that I've noticed from mock interviewing MBA candidates, I had already mentioned like the I versus we mistake. So I always say I did X, not we did X. Claim, take credit. A lot of people end up spending a lot of time on context, really setting up the interview response. So within the CAR framework or STAR framework, you've got context, action, and result, or situation, task, action, and result. And most of your time really should be spent talking about action, like what you actually did to solve the problem at hand, how you worked with the team, and then you close out with results. But a lot of people end up unfortunately spending so much time on context and situation and task setup where like really just want to know what you actually did, not just like the background. So similar to the resume where you jump straight into your results and your action, like you kind of want to take the same approach for interviewing. So spend the most time set on the action piece. Do a little setup enough to paint the picture for the interviewer of what's going on, and then wrap up with results and always quantify your results. I improved sales by 10%, or I saved us 200 million in cost, or whatever, make it up, but make sure you always quantify And I personally like to close with something that I learned from the experience. So this was able to strengthen a particular skill of mine, or I began to, appreciate X more. Probably just, for me personally, I feel a little awkward just ending with, I grew sales by this much, and that's the end of the story. But yeah, you can always personalize it a little bit, like be comfortable enough when you're preparing for your interviews, like know your story inside and out. A lot of people will ask follow-up questions about your responses. Usually, some folks get nervous about that, but really the interviewer is trying to understand your experience as much as possible. They just want to know what you are capable of. It's not questioning or interrogating you. So don't get nervous about that.
I love that advice there. So yeah, I think a lot of people may be familiar with STAR method, but if you're not, it's situation, task, action, result. So I haven't heard of CAR method, but I think I like that better because STAR is always like so many steps, but CAR is STAR, but
super
simplified. So I love that. But the key things to remember there is don't spend too much time describing the situation. And I see this mistake happen a lot where they don't really care that much all the details about the project. Like it might be interesting to you to talk about all of the situations. Situation stuff is like describing maybe like the specific product or the specific campaign. Like that's not really going to be that relevant. Like high level, you want to mention, you don't need to go into the nitty gritty. And I've had people spend like way too much time talking about that. And then like you mentioned, what really matters, like what you did. And then that clarification of we versus I is also really important. I actually just did a podcast episode around this in portfolios. I see this mistake a lot in portfolios where they show me this awesome marketing campaign, but there's no way you did this entire thing. So like, what exactly did you do from this? Like, that's what I want to know. So I love that. And then quantifying your results, obviously super great. But I think the key thing there that you mentioned is mentioning learning. I think that's such a great way to amplify an answer. Also, I know you may not have a result for every answer. Like maybe there is a situation where you don't have a quantifiable metric. I think the result could be the learning. Like that's a great way. It's like maybe you don't have a result for a specific experience. The result can be what you took away from that. And that can kind of help you fulfill that R requirement if maybe you're kind of struggling.
One more thing that came to mind on interviews, since I have mock interviewed with a lot of MBA candidates, we have a lot of folks who are changing careers or pivoting industries, functions even. If you're coming from if you are changing, make sure that you use language that the interviewer understands. So often I've talked to people who are coming from more technical jobs, so they might have been an engineer or they worked in the medical field, and they'll use terminology that I just do not know because I work in marketing, I work in consumer products. Like I'm sure you know what you're talking about, but I don't. And so that's challenging for the interviewer to, again, like really assess like your capability, your accomplishments. It gets stuck in that, and I just kind of get lost and don't pay attention to like what the rest of your story. So if you can explain things in very clear layman terms so that's easy for anyone to understand, that's really helpful as well.
That's a really, really good point. And I think sometimes we think we need to sound smart and use fancy language to make ourselves seem smarter. But that's not the case at all. And it's actually a skill to be able to explain your accomplishments simply. It's always like, what's that analogy of like, say this to me as if I were a seventh grader. And I think that's true in any situation. I was actually like recently teaching SEO. And one of the things I teach with SEO is like, in college, you're taught to write with all these big words, right? You're writing these big papers and these fancy words and these long paragraphs. But in marketing, you don't write like that. In marketing, you want to write simply. It has to be people have to be able to understand it and understand it easy. And so you want to write at an 8th grade reading level or below. But it's something sometimes you have to unlearn because we're taught so much to make ourselves sound smarter. I remember in college, thesaurus.com was my best friend, but it's a bit different in the real world.
Yep.
Okay, so I wanted to stick with this MBA topic a little bit. And I know one of the decisions you made after working at Walmart for 5 years as a marketing manager, you went and got your MBA. So can you talk to me about that decision?
Yeah. So both my parents work in business. I think they had always been kind of like whispering in my ear, like, Margaret, like you need to go get your MBA at some point. So I knew like even when I first started at Walmart, I was going to get my MBA. It was just a matter of when. People make different choices on when they choose to get their MBA. I waited 5 years because, I was enjoying my job enough. I was still learning a lot. I was getting promoted. But eventually I was to a point where I felt like my career felt a little stagnant. And, I was learning that there were other parts of marketing that I had not personally explored before, and brand management was what I was really interested in. So that's when I decided to buckle down and study for the GMAT and start applying for schools. And lucky enough, I was able to get into the Indiana University program, Kelley School of Business. And it was a really good decision for me because I knew that the career pivot I wanted to make was going to be that much easier if I had an MBA. I knew I wanted to work in brand management. I wanted to work at brand management at P&G specifically, so I had a very targeted goal because I knew P&G, they invented brand management and a very large, world-renowned consumer products goods company, so I knew I wanted to go there. And I easily probably could have just cold applied to P&G, but I think having gone through the MBA program and the experience and exposure and networking that I got through the program, it just made that process so much simpler. So yeah, MBA all the way for me, but it's not for everyone. You can definitely make career pivots without an MBA. It just depends on what your career goals are.
Can you speak to what your MBA, what doors your MBA opened for you that maybe wouldn't have been opened without it, or what opportunities it gave you for someone who's maybe a couple years into their career and maybe deciding do I just cold apply? Do I just keep getting my experience? Do I just switch companies? Or do I, take the year or 2 years to go invest in getting my...
Yeah. So even though I studied marketing and studied business in my undergrad, I knew obviously my experience at Walmart was only in marketing. So I wanted to be a more well-rounded marketing professional. So for me, getting my MBA, obviously you take all the classes, right? So you take finance, accounting, supply chain, all the above. And while I personally do not enjoy those classes, I know I need to learn those things to be a better business professional. So I think being able to learn about all these different functions, I probably would have had more difficulty if I just stayed at Walmart. I probably could have shadowed someone in all of these functions, but I think when you are sitting in a classroom with a whole group of your classmates, it's just a very different experience. You're really hyper-focused on learning all these different subjects. So yeah, that was helpful for me to be very intentional and focused about how I was spending my time. Just take a pause, if you will, for my career, but still a huge investment in just my long-term career growth.
Yeah, and giving you those technical skill sets that maybe aren't that business mindset. I am imagining is really what you're getting from that, and that technical skill set, which I can imagine makes you look at things a lot differently. And
Absolutely.
Gives you a very different perspective. Can you also tell me the difference between brand marketing and brand management? Or is there not much? Because I know you mentioned they invented brand management, but is it much different from brand marketing, or anything you can share there?
Yeah, so based on my understanding, brand management is more of a general management function, so kind of the CEO of a business, kind of overseeing all aspects of the business. You've got P&L responsibility, you're working with that core cross-functional team. Brand marketing, I believe, is probably just the marketing aspect. So you're that one cross-functional partner that might just be marketing a particular brand. I know different companies have different definitions for all these roles, so I think just figure out what marketing looks like at different companies. It varies quite a bit even within the same industry. So I would just do your own research and kind of think about what you are interested in and if that's something that you want to do.
Interesting. And then that makes sense why a company as big as Procter & Gamble would have the brand management roles, obviously because there's companies within the companies. But that's really, really interesting to hear, because I think sometimes you may just see like brand and you may put an assumption on a role of like what it is if you see brand in the title, but doing that digging of like really looking in. And then also I think your role sounds really exciting for somebody who does want that type of experience, and you do like the brand side of things. Like, you haven't even, like, honestly, I didn't even know this was a career path that somebody can take, which is also what I love about the podcast, is I'm always finding new career paths because that you could possibly do. Because I think that's might not be something on everybody's radar, is that you can do brand management. Like, we might always just think brand marketing.
Yeah, that's right.
So that's super cool. And then one thing I'm also curious about, because you got your MBA, you were at Walmart, and then you left to get your MBA. Was it an option to, like, did you ever think about trying to get it sponsored through your company? Because I know that sometimes options people do is they work for a company, they try to get the company to sponsor their MBA, and then they stay and they grow at that company.
Yeah, I don't think that was available at Walmart, unfortunately, especially since I was choosing to do a full-time program, so I'm literally leaving for 2 years. But I do know a lot of companies, they might sponsor if you did like a part-time or an online, and they might contribute, I don't know, hundreds or thousands of dollars. So I would definitely see if your current employer does something like that. That could be a really easy way to get a degree on the side while still keeping your full-time job.
Okay. So yeah, I was curious about that, because I know obviously it's a big undertaking to like take 2 years off work and to also invest that much money into a degree. But interesting to kind of see all paths to people's jobs and kind of how they get there, and that there's not one right way to get any job, and that there are so many different avenues that you can take. And I love how with your story too, is because I think sometimes people might get their MBA a bit earlier or a bit later, or just like really trusting the timing of your career and being like, okay, like I think I knew maybe I always wanted to do this, but I waited until it felt like the right time. I didn't force myself to go get this MBA. I waited until I felt like, okay, I got all this great experience, and then now my career's feeling stagnant. Now's a good time for me to go and take that opportunity. So I kind of love that you were intuitive in that sense and kind of trusted that the timing would be right to go and get that degree. All right, Margaret. Well, looking back at your career and just all the incredible things that you have accomplished, is there any advice you'd like to pass along to somebody who's a bit earlier in their career and would love to build a career like yours one day?
Yeah, what a big question. I think, so the first thing that comes to mind is take control of your career. No one cares more about your career than yourself, hopefully. So if you have a career in mind that you'd like to have, whether that's getting promoted at a certain frequency or moving into a certain type of role, a certain team, types of project, I would just make sure you vocalize that with your manager, because people can't read your mind. Your manager can't read your mind, so you gotta tell them what you want regularly. So yeah, take control of your career. I think constantly networking is also very helpful, even if you're not looking for a job. I think it's important to keep networking, because you're just one person in your field, in your industry, and there's a whole world of other things happening out there. So it could be a good way to keep a pulse on what's going on. You could learn about a new job at a different company that you had no idea existed, that you are really interested in, so that could open doors for you. But consistently networking, I think, is really important. You can lean on your network for all sorts of things, whether you're trying to solve a business problem in your current job or you are ready to move on to a new role, a new job, whatever. It's good to have those connections. Other advice, yeah, I feel like those are the big ones.
That's perfect.
Yeah.
I think those are two great big ideas to end the episode on. And I think we touched on a lot of really actionable advice in this episode, which I think was also really fun. So hopefully everyone kind of gets to walk away with something new around, resumes, interviews, deciding whether or not to get your MBA, the power of networking, Honestly, I feel like we've touched on so much today, Margaret. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing your career journey. It is absolutely impressive what you have built for yourself and your career, and hopefully really inspire to all of the marketing girlies listening to today's episode. So thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you for having me, Natalie.